Hi everyone, this is Yvonne Davis, accredited facilitator with the Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network and author of The Power of Manifestation and In the Magic Flow. So tonight I am continuing to do videos in week 6, and this is probably going to be a fairly short one since I'm by myself, and so it's like less airtime when it's just me and not me and David Steele. So anyway, we have been talking about the part of the self that sometimes gets disowned. And I was trying to think of a name to call that part of the self. And I came up with the name, the little rebel, because that part of the self is resisting. And so even though we're in week 6, which is abundance, I actually think that this is very much connected, because oftentimes the reason why we don't allow ourselves abundance is because we have disconnected, we've disassociated from this part of ourselves that I call the little rebel. Because in actuality, that little rebel is probably very closely tied to the child artist. And so if the child doesn't feel safe, it is going to very often rebel. And the way that a child generally rebels is that it wants to, curl up by itself and doesn't want to talk and doesn't want to be seen. And so when you're having this experience of really wanting flow and abundance and creativity in your life, and you're experiencing these blocks, you don't understand why you're blocked, and you're experiencing resistance and you don't know why you're experiencing resistance, often it's because in some way that child is still not feeling safe. And the child is refusing to open up, refusing to talk, refusing to be seen. It's completely in a place of resistance and rebellion. And so we cannot reach this place of integration that I so often talk about if we cannot make friends with that child self, that little rebel. And one of the most important things is for that part of the self to know that it is safe. So tonight I want to talk about someone that I knew years ago who, when I first met him, we were both interested in nonviolent communication, and we were both interested in being entrepreneurs. So we had a natural, affinity or affection, and we became friends, and we often spent time together, like in cafes, and we would work together to try to help each other to become self-employed. And I really enjoyed the relationship and the process and everything that came out of it. But what I started to notice over time about this person who, first thing I'll say is that we parted ways in the summer of 2015. So it's been over 2.5 years. And I don't have any interaction or contact with this person anymore. And I also want to say that, in NVC, one of the principles is non-judgment. So I want to be very clear here that I probably am going to make judgments about this person, but I also want to acknowledge that I'm aware of that, I'm conscious of that, and the judgments are really have to do with my own values. I'm just using this particular person as a way to illuminate the story that I want to tell. So I'm saying that in advance because I know that the students that are in my workshop, Unleash Your Creativity, who are watching these videos, they are also trained in NVC. And so I want to be very clear here that when we use NVC, we use it for connection, and it's a tool for connection. And that we don't actually judge the jackal. The jackal is what we call the judgmental thoughts and words. And so I think a lot of times in NVC we give this impression like the jackal is bad. And that's not what we're saying. We're not saying it's bad. We're just simply saying usually when you speak from that position of judgment, evaluation, criticism, you are not you're not moving toward connection. But the thing is, that relationship ended 2.5 years ago. I'm not looking for connection with that person, so I don't need to use this tool for connection. I do, on the other hand, want consciousness in the way that I speak and communicate. That's why I'm bringing awareness to this. I'm just naming this, okay? So I'm just saying that I am conscious of the fact that I may say some things that are judgmental, and that I'm owning that, okay? So that, in a sense, is being in alignment with NVC, because the two goals of NVC are connection and raising our consciousness about the way that we speak and think and communicate, and so, and use language. And so I am letting you know that I am very conscious of the way I'm using my language here, and that I'm not using it as a tool to connect with that particular person at this particular time. This is just simply to illuminate a story. So, as I was saying, we met in an NVC workshop in April of 2011, and we were both interested in becoming self-employed. We were both interested in nonviolent communication, so we had a natural affinity and affection, and we got to know each other, and we started going to cafes and helping each other and supporting each other and becoming self-employed. But over time, what I noticed was that as I was striving to grow and make progress in the things that I had intended to make progress in, this other person was, it wasn't that he wasn't doing things, but he tended to cycle back. So he had kind of a circular way, a circular form of behavior in which he would make some progress, and then he would do something that was self-destructive, and then he would repent, and then everything would be fine for a while, and then again he would do something that was self-destructive, and then he would repent, and then he'd be good for a while, and then he'd do something self-destructive and repent and be good for a while. So there was always this circular movement, and so in a sense he always ended up staying in the same place. He didn't actually go anywhere. And the reason why I bring this up is because I started to sort of ask myself internally, or maybe I was having a conversation with him internally, imagining that we would meet years from now, and like maybe we would just bump into each other in a cafe, and I wondered what we might say to each other. And I thought the thing that I would say to him is that the reason why he never made any progress was because of his self-sabotage. But the interesting thing about it, this is the really interesting thing that I wanted to get to, is that his self-sabotage was not what he thought it was, because the self-sabotage was actually his self-judgment, because he would always say to himself, you know, I don't have this, I don't have that, and he would say, my life is a mess, I can't do anything right, I've made the wrong choices my whole life, I should have done this, I should have done that. And it was so critical of himself. And to a large degree, the criticisms were around the pleasures that he allowed himself. So he would say, you know, for example, that he would criticize himself about not saving money, and so not having a savings account, not having a retirement account, and things like this, and or other pleasures that he had experienced in life. He would then turn around and judge himself for that. And so he saw that what he saw as his self-sabotage was the fact that he didn't save money, the fact that he didn't have a retirement account, the fact that he didn't have insurance, the fact that he didn't have a high-paying job, the fact that he hadn't maintained a long-term intimate relationship, that he'd never gotten married, that he'd never bought a house, you know, all these things that he saw as being successful and disciplined, and he hadn't done those things, and so he would criticize himself for that and put himself down and judge himself. And what was interesting was that from my perspective, the judgment and the criticism and putting himself down, that was how he actually sabotaged himself. It wasn't the act of not saving money. It wasn't the act of indulging in pleasure. It was the act of criticizing himself for it. It was the criticism and the judgment that was the self-sabotage, not the pleasure. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of times we have deeply, deeply embedded in our core beliefs and even in our central nervous system and our physiology, we have this deep, deep belief that we are not worthy of God's divine abundance, that we are not worthy of divine providence, that we are not worthy of being taken care of, and that our needs will be met, and that things can actually come to us easily and effortlessly. And that is exactly what Cameron is talking about in week 6. She says, what is your concept of God? Do you believe in a benevolent God? Do you believe in an abundant universe? Do you believe that this benevolence, this abundance, would actually love you enough to give you what you need to support you and to meet your needs? And not just in a squinty little way, but like really abundantly, you know, just like letting it all flow. Like you are loved. You deserve these things. They can come to you and it's okay. You know, you're worthy. You can receive it all. And it can be abundant and it can be grand and loving and joyous and fulfilling, and you know, it can be really, really good. You don't have to fight for it. You can receive it. And I know this is true. And it's not just because we live in a first world country. While I will admit that that probably makes it easier, it's not, you know, to say that only people in the first world can experience abundance is just not true. That in itself is a limiting belief. So here was this man who, and I'll tell you, from the very split second I laid eyes on him, and even to this day, I still believe it. I was so impressed. I was knocked over. I thought, man, that is one good-looking guy. He was tall. He was extraordinarily handsome. And he was intelligent. And he was athletic. And he had this very charismatic personality. I mean, you know, it was like when I looked at him, I thought, this man could have the world at his feet. I mean, there was nothing to hold him back, even in terms of, the things that make life easy for people. He was male, he was white, he was American. He had everything, everything, everything that any person who longs for anything, would have wanted. He had it all. And yet he could not crawl out of his deep hole of low self-worth and low self-esteem. He literally lived underground in a dark, cluttered, dusty, dirty, tiny little studio apartment and drove a beat-up old truck. And he couldn't see himself as worthy of anything more than that. And he had constantly had to pawn his most prized possessions to pay the rent, even though the rent was extremely low relative to the market in the city that we live in. So it was just like there was no excuse, but it was all internal. It was his core beliefs. He just simply did not believe he was worthy of God's divine love and abundance. He didn't believe that God loved him and that God would bring him anything he desired. And that is the truth, when we really believe that we deserve, God will provide. And I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that. And that is what week 6 is about. So now that I've told you the story about this tragic person who could not let any goodness come to him, he couldn't receive God's abundant love. He couldn't receive that wealth because he didn't think he was worthy. He always blocked it. So whenever he allowed himself to feel pleasure, he thought that he had sinned in some way, and he even used those words. So he saw himself as a sinner and unworthy, and so if he took pleasure in anything in life, he then had to criticize himself and then punish himself. And so it was this constant cycle. And so it was that judgment and that criticism and that punishing that was actually the self-sabotage. It wasn't when he allowed himself to feel and receive the pleasure and abundance of this universe. It was then when he judged himself, criticized himself, and punished himself. That's when he was actually sabotaging himself. Because then he blocked the flow of more of the abundance that divine providence longs to give to us. He would block that because it would be like saying, no, I don't deserve it, I'm bad. It's so sad. It makes me sad even to this day to think about it. Because in his heart, he was a really good person. He just didn't see himself as worthy of God's divine love and abundance. And the reason why I tell you that story is because if for any reason you are thinking you are not worthy of God's divine love and abundance, if you think you are not worthy to receive what divine providence has to offer you in any form, even the tiniest little thing, the tiniest little gift of pleasure, or something really big, if you think you're not worthy, you're going to block it. And so the thing is that he always bypassed the easy opportunities because he thought they had to be hard. And there were so many times when I offered help, offered suggestions, said, hey, why don't you join us? We're doing an NVC practice group. It's free. Nope, don't have time for that. Didn't have time for artists' dates, and that was always his excuse from my perspective, for not allowing in the joy and the pleasure and the fun, which, you know what? God absolutely loves it. God is Leela, and Leela is divine play. That divine source is where all that fun and play and creativity and pleasure comes from. But nope, he wouldn't allow himself that. So anyway, after I imagined that conversation, like if I was to run into him in a cafe someday in the future, what I would say to him. After I imagined that conversation, then the next thing I did, which is something I always do, I turned the mirror around and I said, okay, so you're saying that to him. Say it back to yourself. And that's the most powerful part of this video, is that if you see someone who is sabotaging themselves, after you imagine in your mind what you would say to them, turn it around and say it to yourself. So I said that to myself. I said, Yvonne, the thing that holds you back is that you bypass the easy opportunities because you think they have to be hard. That really got me thinking. That really got me thinking. So I'm going to leave you with that today, to remember first and foremost that you are absolutely worthy of everything. You're worthy of God's love. You're worthy of divine abundance. You're worthy of having your needs met. You are loved unconditionally. The divine in this universe absolutely loves you unconditionally and absolutely will meet your needs if you are willing to be open and receive. And remember, you deserve the good things in life. You deserve to have fun. You deserve to play. You deserve pleasure. You deserve all the good that can come to you. And we do live in an abundant universe. And God is very generous. So I hope you will look in a mirror today and say that out loud to yourself. So I will leave you with that today, and I will see you again tomorrow. So remember, please subscribe to this channel, click like on the video, share with your social media and your friends and family, ring the bell for notifications, and please leave your comments in the comment boxes below. And I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.